Hi, I'm Don Goldberg with TechView, and our guest today is Paul Margie, who we know is a leader in the technology policy arena here in Washington and someone who's been involved in many battles. But what we're really here to talk to you today about is what you've been doing in Haiti on a humanitarian efforts recently. So tell us how you got down there and sort of what you've been doing down there.
Sure. So I'm the U.S. representative for an NGO called Telecom Sans Frontières, or Telecom Without Borders.
Right.
And they're a 10-year-old international not-for-profit that concentrates on emergency telecom activities. And so I was down with them to do humanitarian calling operations and to set up telecom centers for the UN, for NGOs, and for the Haitian government.
Well, you know, we've all seen the terrible stories on TV and read a lot about it, but here you're coming in from a little bit different perspective, and hence why TechView wanted to interview you, which is the need to have telecommunications for the people there who are really desperate. So tell us kind of, I mean, you must have been in some of the camps and what you saw and sort of what you were able to accomplish.
Sure. Well, it becomes really clear when you get to the camps or even to the UN operations centers that telecommunications isn't a luxury and a disaster. It's an absolute necessity. For the UN workers that are there, or for the Haitian government responders, or for the US military, whoever it happens to be, they use the telecom assets that we bring in or that they later bring in to do the logistics, to do the organization and the assessment that's necessary to really get the food and the water and the health care to the people they need. And the same is true for the camps. When you go into these camps, you'll see long, long lines of people line up to use our free 3-minute international calling operation. And they do it to reach their relatives, overwhelmingly in the States, to let them know they're alive. It's often their first call, and then to try to get resources so they can help themselves.
And so let's talk about the technology a little bit, and then we'll get back to the humanitarian side of things. So what are you taking down there? And clearly there's no electricity, so you're working off of rechargeables. What are you bringing to them, and how is it working?
Sure. So we have 2 tiers of teams. The one is the rapid response team that came in from our office in Managua, Nicaragua, and they come very, very light. So they carry satellite equipment such as the Mini-M device or a BGAN device from Inmarsat, as well as Iridium sat phones. And they come in with almost nothing. They are packed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, ready to go. They came in on a UN flight and were there within 24 hours, and they start operations using these devices, which are very light. They're the size of a laptop or a little bit more, and they can connect. The Mini-M does mostly voice, and then the BGAN unit can do broadband, data, and voice for 8 or 9 people simultaneously.
And what were you seeing in the camps? I mean, I'm sure the people, well, you said it was their first call since the disaster, so this is the first time they can really tell their loved ones that they're still alive in the United States, but there's probably some other basic needs they need to fulfill.
That's right. So the calls were to tell folks that they were alive, to tell people, often they were the first one of the family to reach to the outside, and so they could tell people from the extended family who was alive and who was injured and who was not. And then they also ask overwhelmingly for resources, because the scale of this disaster, it was shocking to see how big and wide the problem was. Port-au-Prince is a big city, a city of 3 million people. 2 million of those people are still relying on food and water distributions, and 1 million of them are out on the street. I had heard that there were 10,000 separate camps in the area, which means that just to do any kind of aid distribution, so let's say water, would take you, if you did 100 of them a day, 100 days to do one cycle.
Right.
And so the result is that people had to find ways of helping themselves. And so they would try to find water, they would try to find food, but in order to do that, they needed money. And so the phone call was their way to have money arranged to be sent to Western Union, and the few places that were working, they could then know that it was worth the time to spend a half a day waiting in line to get these resources so that they could feed their families.
So clearly, as we see on the news, I mean, medical care is #1 and food and water is #2, but probably telecommunications, or a way to communicate, is probably #3 or 4 for these.
I think it's really important. Imagine trying to do your job now, or any of our jobs, without access to telephones and data. You just can't do it. And it's the same thing for whether it's the people that are living in the camps, or especially the UN responders, the Haitian responders, the US government responders that are there. If you want to get water out, if you want to get food out, if you want to do medical distribution in an efficient and effective way, you just have to have connectivity to do it. And so we tried to get in there and provide that connectivity.
Now, you were telling us off camera a little bit that you think it's total chaos there, but in fact these camps sort of self-organize. Tell us sort of what you saw.
Well, it was amazing. You'd go into a camp and the city is just horribly destroyed. With 1 million people out in the street, it means that every public space, whether it's a park or a garden or what used to be a place where folks would play soccer, are covered with tent cities. And they're not even really tents. Most of the people had their bed sheets up on sticks, and you'd have a whole family living there. And the conditions were really impossible. So what we would do, we would go out, we would find one of these camps and find who was in charge. And almost universally, except for the really big camps, which were hard to organize, you'd find that they had appointed some director or a committee of people to oversee it, and they would welcome the services that we were bringing and help us give it to the rest of the camp. Go around with them. We would bring our own megaphone, and they would walk around in Creole and tell everyone what was happening. And we didn't have security problems. People were happy to see us.
Well, that's great. Well, I know you volunteer your time, but this costs money. How do you fund yourselves, and how can people help if you need it?
We are incredibly lucky to have some great sponsors in the form of the United Nations Foundation, the Vodafone Foundation, Inmarsat, the EU funds us as well. And for this emergency, AT&T, Comcast, USTA, and others have been very, very generous. But the scope of this disaster is so big that we need to stay, and we can only stay so long as our resources hold out. And the cost of just one VSAT is $30,000 a month for one VSAT in Haiti today. And so we would love it if we had more support. And folks can go to the website, which is www.tsfi, like Telecom Sans Frontières International, .org. Or they can find me, and I'll make sure it gets to the right place.
Great. Well, Paul, thank you very much for being here. Fascinating story. I'm sure experiences that you'll never forget, but we appreciate your being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Don Goldberg for TechView.